Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Success is Complicated podcast. I am your host, RaQuel.
And I am your co-host, Cieara.
And we are really happy to be back. I think this is episode 6?
Yes.
And today we're going to talk about what makes life hard, especially as an adult. And we wanted to kind of talk about it. I may have mentioned this on a few other episodes, but when I decided to pursue a second career to become a therapist, what I noticed was that we have this framework for children, but there's no framework for adults. And then when you get into adulthood, you start to experience all of these transitions. And our goal on this podcast is to make people feel like they can navigate adulthood with a little bit more ease and be able to do it with resiliency. So life is hard, but also talking about the accountability and responsibility that comes with that, right? Because life is hard as a perception, right?
Right, definitely.
So we're going to talk about that today and just kind of talk about some of our personal experiences because we're close to our 40s almost.
Do not put me there. Do not put me there.
Well, I mean, if you know the other side of that, right?
I mean, I do know
Like
the other side of that.
40,
However,
that means that you don't make it to 40.
I am closer to 30 than I am to 40.
Hello. That's a good way to look at it. So last night I was watching Wind Down with Mary. She had an episode with Mary, with 50 Cent, and then there was an episode with Carisha and Taraji P. Henson. And 50 had made a comment. He was like, depression is a luxury.
Ooh.
And I was like, ooh, like, you know, as a mental health therapist, I was like, I kind of, to some degree, I agree with them. But on the other side, I don't necessarily agree because I understand that depression is real.
You mentioned that to me this morning, and I'm like, well, if you always got to be in fight, then there's no room to actually feel.
Right. But that's what he was saying, though. But when you talk about accountability and responsibility, to some degree, you can't stay there, which is why I was like, let's talk about like what makes life hard. Especially as an adult, right? Because we have all of these transitions. And when you think about childhood, right? Like you're kind of prepared for the milestones because the research is there, the data is there. Like these are the developmental milestones or the challenges that you should start seeing with your children. And from adulthood, I had started thinking about like, when were those moments like transitioning from adolescent into adulthood that I started to feel like, or like life is hard. And the feeling for me was like discontentment. So I remember when I first went off to college and I had decided to go to Baltimore, had never really been outside of like the Norfolk, Virginia Beach area. And I remember it was my dad there, my aunt, maybe somebody else. But I remember like we were having a good time. And then when it was time for them to leave, I felt like this level of discomfort. Now, I didn't know because like 50 Cent depression or whatever, or your feelings was a luxury. I didn't know like what I was experiencing. Today, when I reflect back on it, I'm like, there was a transition happening. And when transitions happen, doesn't necessarily mean that you're prepared to go through it. But that first night, I had peed on myself. And that might be like TMI, but when I go back and think about it, like it made sense because for me, it was like leaving the home. Even though I like thought I was excited to be leaving the home, I'm going away, I didn't know what I was walking into. And to have like my dad like drop me off and leave me, like it was very unsettling for me. And that was one of my first moments like as an adult to where I felt like this is hard because you don't have a choice. Like, because my dad would always say, I got mine, you need to get yours. So if you weren't going in the military, you had to be figuring out something, get you a trade or going to college. So it wasn't like, because I felt that discomfort that I could say, hey, Dad, you know what? I decided to just jump back in the car with y'all and I'm going to go home because I didn't feel like I had a choice but to stay there. But my first night, that was...
Did you truly feel discomfort? And I asked that just because, all of the transitions that I've had in my life to where I felt like life may be hard. I don't think that was what was represented in a moment. It was kind of like, this is new. I don't quite know what I'm experiencing, but did you truly feel like
this is new?
Okay, so
I never have been anywhere like North Carolina. I mean, those don't really count. And you, I had never been in. I hadn't seen much of the world, so to drop me off like 4 hours away, like it was new.
Okay.
But talking about some feelings, like I didn't know how I feel. Who's gonna talk about your feelings? I just told you my dad said I got mine. You need to get yours.
So did you tell your dad
18,
you peed on yourself?
Yeah, I told my dad that I peed on myself because we always had that relationship, but it was never a why. Like,
did he go and get you a counselor or a therapist?
Girl, child.
Say you need to talk to somebody?
No,
because that's what we would do with our kids today, right?
Yeah,
we were like, oh my God, you need to get a therapist. We might try to
be there for them and listen to how they feel because it was a big transition for me, and I think that in adulthood we see a lot of transitions and like. They continue to get more complex. Like that was, I mean, looking back on them, like that was simple. But it was a transition. Like it was new. Like, prior to doing that as a child, like, it's kind of laid out for you. Like you go to school, you get up, get good grades. If you play sports, you do that. You got your job. We worked at Shoney's. Like, I mean, it was laid out for you. Like there was some consistency in terms of what you did do and what you didn't do. So it was new for me.
So how do we, I mean, when we get into like life being hard, right? Mm-hmm. How do we kind of transition from life being hard to the good life? I know we're early in the episode, right. I do think that, people, that's what people are ultimately looking for, right? Throughout the hard times, like it has to be worth it because like even when you were going to college, you were like, okay, I'm doing this college thing because
girl, I won't do no college thing. I won't. When I first got the kid, and I didn't even understand that. Like I think it's important because my first semester, I damn near flunked out. Like because I was like, all right, like how does work?
Right.
All right, I set my schedule, and I set the schedule. I had 8 o'clock classes. I ain't wake up to go to none of those classes. And my uncle called me. He was like, what your grades look like this semester? And I'm like, they're all right. And I sent him to him. He's like, this is not good. And I was like, I mean, I'm passing. Then I started talking about, well, it's the teacher's fault and this and that. He was like, look, let me tell you something. I don't want to hear all that. Now, he was the uncle that had went off to college. He had already had a level of success, but we weren't as close as we are today. But that was my first introduction into like accountability and responsibility. And I never forget, you remember when we got that Sue money? We were about 18 or 19 years old.
When we were hit by the drunk driver.
Right, when we were hit by the drunk driver. We talked about that on an episode, but I didn't think about coming back and paying no tuition. Like when we got I think we got 10 grand a piece.
I iced my boyfriend out
with them Kango hats. Her boyfriend was from Detroit at the time, and my boyfriend, which is my husband today, we were like on the ocean front. We were booking rooms. Like we were living our best life. Never did I think about that tuition was due because my uncle, he told me he had me. Whatever financial aid didn't cover, he had me. So I wasn't worried about that.
Right.
Girl, I got back to school. Mm-hmm. And you don't have black folks talking families, right? Mm-hmm. And like one of my uncles told him that Quail had gotten some Sue money. So he was like, well, what you should have did was you should have held on to that money and paid your tuition. Who was at 18, 19? I'm not thinking about paying for the tuition. You said you got me.
Right, and you don't even understand the responsibility of paying for the tuition. I mean, now there are some people out there who do, right? Who aren't really, ain't nobody saying they got you.
Right. I mean, but those lessons came because he did not answer the phone for the rest of the semester, and I had to figure it out. First of all, my daddy was like, girl, I told you to go in the military because we ain't got no money to be paying for college. I told you to go into the military. We're going to figure it out. And I remember I had gotten me a job. I never had a problem with working, but I remember having to knock on doors, begging financial aid. Financial aid at HBCU is ghetto. Like, I absolutely hated it. You go in the line, and it was ghetto.
I didn't have the same experience.
Well, I did. At Morgan State, it was ghetto. Like, because I would imagine they hear the same story. So it got to the point, it was always like, next, because everybody coming in there trying to get more money, get financial aid.
But
can't
that's
really pay. Next. All right, my schedule got dropped. They dropped my classes. My classes were dropped. And I remember I was like, because, at this point I had learned, like, you got to get up and go to class. Mm-hmm. I went and talked to my teachers and I was like, look, they dropped my classes, but I'm going to figure something out. Like, can I still continue to come to class? And I remember going to see the guy that was in charge of the academic services, affair. And I came every day because they said, this is the person that's going to be able to get you the money. I needed like $2,000 more. My Aunt Gina had came through, my dad had came through, and my money a little bit of money I had came through from working at Quiznos. And I went and saw that man every day. First time, he was like, no, I have a lot of students that come in here. Like, what makes you different? I'm like, no, I mean, because at that point, I was there because somebody told me that I needed to be there. I didn't understand the gravity of what it meant to really be in college.
Right.
And that's why I say at 18 years old, like, are you really grown?
Right. And my experience was kind of totally different, RaQuel, because someone looked at me and, just was like, oh, she worth it, right? Meaning at Livingstone, I had one of the counselors, she was like, you know what, we're going to go and get you alumni funds. We're going to have you come and meet people so you can get this money to pay for the rest of the semester and all those things. And boop, I ended up pregnant. What? So while I didn't get like the knock of the responsibility at that level, oh, it was coming, right? It was coming, right? Because actually getting pregnant instead of not finishing college, that was when life got real. Right. It got hard.
Right. You make me like, as I'm thinking about how we're talking about this and just like how we develop as adults and what does a real framework look like for us. It's not necessarily by this age you have a house or you get married or any of those things. I think that it's a continuous process of like self-awareness, putting yourself in different environments so that you can continue to grow. Because to me, when I think about college, right? College wasn't about like the coursework. I learned so many life lessons in college.
Right.
So many life lessons in college that like contributed to who I was. And I think, oftentimes we hear people say like college is it's a trick, it's a joke, and taking money, but it's not that. Like all of these things are life lessons.
Well, I think today, people look at school and say that it's a joke. Like they're like, oh, you go to school, right? They're not teaching anything. But when you think about the skills that you learn in school, is they're irreplaceable.
Right.
Like
right.
if it's not necessarily the coursework, right?
Right.
It's the character and the accountability and responsibility that you are developing along the way that ends up suiting you for your continuous growth.
So I was thinking about when we say that life is hard, I don't know necessarily like that life is hard. These transitions are hard. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the times we don't have the knowledge or experience to put it together, right?
Right.
In terms of what we're being faced with or presented with. And because a lot of us are not necessarily okay with being vulnerable, because who's going to show their full face card, right? Like, I'm struggling with this. Because oftentimes we talk about vulnerability. I mean, I remember when I think back, like, after college, right? You graduate.
Right.
And then moving out here to Houston. I moved out here to and I thought I was doing something, girl, negotiating my first salary. I'm like, I remember he was like $35,000. I was like, no, I can stay in Richmond for this. And then he gave me 50, right? And then I go and get me a car. My car payment was $500. Then I went and got an apartment on Post Oak. And then I didn't know the student loans was gonna roll around like the payment.
6 months.
I ain't had no money. I didn't have any money. I didn't have any money left over. That Toyota Camry, it was nice. It was brand new, but that payment was high. And then you needed car insurance for that. But you never really think about. But in the process, life is teaching us like what it means to be responsible and accountable. And we always talk about free will on this podcast, right?
Right.
Because we all have free will. We have this sense of agency, and everybody is going to be presented with it. And I think about when you talk about like life is hard, I think that it is leaning into responsibility and accountability, like when we don't want to make those choices.
Right.
But even when you don't make choices, you're still making a choice.
Right.
And that's the thing. That's the hardest part about adulthood to me is the transitions. Nobody transition looks the same.
Right.
We just talked about our college experiences, and they were totally different. And when you think about children, right, like even though they develop like at different times, and there are certain developmental deficits that may occur, like you still have a sense of what that progression looks like. And adulthood doesn't necessarily grant that. Like you were saying, like I'm in college, you got pregnant in college, so it kind of changed the trajectory in a sense in terms of the direction that you were going on. And that is the shit that makes adulthood hard, because you do got that free will now, and depending on the household that you coming from, we see you grown at 18.
Right. And I definitely did not understand that free will, like with getting pregnant, because my parents were like, come home, and I was still blaming them because I was like, I could have just stayed in college and got me an apartment and, finished school and all of these things. And I really could have, right? I really could have, but not truly understanding our free will. And I think that's the biggest part that people struggle with today, right?
We be mad as hell at free will.
Right. And decision making.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think about at the peak of like my most unhappiest moments in life, it was because like life was good, but I always still felt a sense of discomfort. Mm-hmm. So at the peak of the peak of my unhappiness, we had already experienced, we done flown private, we done seen money,
right?
Been around money, making $220,000 a year, 6-figure bonuses, and I was like, shit, I guess I can continue to be a little unhappy.
RaQuel, but that's so interesting because it's so hard to tell people that I truly have it all and I still ain't happy, right? Because a lot of people think that that's where the happiness lies too. I mean, we talked about that last week, but that is where people think the happiness lies. They are so caught up in getting to the next 100,000, to the million, to the private jet.
But that's another phase in adulthood though, right? Like where you reach a certain point and you be like, this ain't it.
Right.
And to be honest, like at some point we all decide to make that pivot in terms of career and defining like what happiness looks like for us.
Right.
But it is probably one of the most difficult decisions that you will probably ever make. At some point, people are probably determined like this marriage ain't it for me.
Right.
Some people might be saying, I don't know why I had kids. Might not say it out loud, but folks damn sure be thinking it.
Oh, for sure.
Because I remember, it took me 8 years before I decided to have another kid. And now Kate and baby, mommy loves you very much. And you were more planned than what came was. But after I had him, like I felt like there was a sense of freedom that was lost, right? Because there's luxury in being able to move however you want to. When you become a mom, like, it's that burden, that responsibility, like, I'm responsible for somebody else.
Right. I think I was telling you about that when I had Dominique. I was surrounded by family. Her dad was there. My cousin Cieara was there.
Right.
My mom was there. And, it felt so good. It felt like a celebration, right? And then everybody went home. And it was just me and the baby. And she started peeing and pooping at the same time. I was like, this shit getting real. Like,
what's the hardest decision you feel like you've ever made so far in adulthood?
The hardest decision I've ever made in adulthood. I'm repeating that to myself because I really got to think about it. So I would say moving to Texas, but it wasn't hard though. But I think it was like the biggest decision that I made, right? To really leave my family, to not have any money. When I moved to Texas, I literally had a food stamp card, $20 in a big old green bag like you see on people back.
Let's go back for a second, because when you came to Texas, I remember, because when we always talk about this, because she always likes to remind me like what I said to her. Now, granted, we say that we've been friends for a very long time.
We have.
We took two different paths. However, we still landed together.
Right.
But when I like to say, I wouldn't say that she's a free bird, but C is going to enjoy life.
You got that right.
She's going to enjoy life. And at the time, I felt like, because I had felt like life was already hard to some degree, you don't have time to enjoy life. Like, you need to do what you're supposed to do. And
that's what her uncle taught her.
That's the first lesson like the real lessons into going to adulthood. Like, you can't count on anybody.
Right.
Like, you need to do what you got to do.
And I say right, but not right.
Like, right. Because
you can't count on people.
I remember she was. Your car had gotten a flat on the highway?
Yes, on Katy Freeway, y'all. I don't know if any of y'all are from Texas, but if you are, Katy Freeway got about 8 lanes. And
that's a lot of lanes coming from Virginia. Yes, it is. That was a transition too, learning how to drive on the highway here.
Right, right.
I was trying to avoid highways everywhere I could. But go ahead.
And I got, driving, boop, 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 got a flat tire. And I am outside of my car walking to the nearest tire shop, because like my dad has taught me, like, you go, you walk to wherever you need to go if you ain't got no wheels. I remember I would take too long to come pick him up from work, and he would be walking on the way there. And stop wiping your eye, RaQuel, because I know my eye is watering. I know.
Okay.
Get that. There we go. Okay. Yeah. So I was walking on the highway to get to the nearest tire shop. But in the meantime, I did what everybody do. Pick up the phone, call your girlfriend while you walking, right? And I proceed to, just complain about the tire, life situations. And this chick just decides to like let loose. Like, what did you say? I don't know what she said to me.
But I remember what she said to me, because she was like, you do not kick a dog when they're down. And it stopped me in my tracks. First I was like, for real? Like, are you serious? This ain't about kicking you down. To me, it was about accountability and responsibility. You come here to Houston for a better life. Like, get your shit together.
But the thing about it was, how was it not together, right? Because when you would consider
too much fun.
When you consider what was, so I guess I've always believed in this like balance, right? Because I was a mom. I also was going to school. I was also working at Burger Girl. And I was dating that night. I mean, I don't see how I won't taking care of
feel
shit,
like
right?
there was no space, but it tells the difference, because we talked about on the last episode, like these polarities, right, and being so extreme. So life has taught me some lessons too. Like you have to make room for space and fun, right? Because if not, you can end up in places that you probably didn't necessarily want to end up, right? So, today I understand it, but then I didn't necessarily understand it because, in my mind, like, coming to Houston was like an opportunity, and coming from where we come from, right? You don't get opportunities like this. You better make the best of it. And my uncle used to always tell me, opportunity only knocks once. Girl, if opportunity only knocks once. I don't believe that today.
He said that too, and I was thinking the same thing. So, which is why when you said what you said, like, I feel like it's a vigorous plan behind all this. Like, I got the next, I don't know, year mapped out.
Let me just give some insight into who he is, though, really quickly, because there's a great deal of respect for what he's been able to accomplish.
Right.
So even today, I mean, I still feel a lot of pressure. Like, he's done very well in life. And when I say very well, he has a multi-million-dollar business, this global organization that he's built. He has stores in Paris and Spain and all these other places, right?
Paris, so I mean, Spain, Singapore, Kuwait,
where we come from, his
Dubai,
voice, right? His voice matters. Like what he says matters,
right? It holds a lot of weight.
It holds a lot of weight. It holds a lot of weight. And I would tell you that 1819, I didn't know what he was doing or what he had really accomplished, right? Mm-hmm. Like anything that he had shown me was nicer than where I was coming from.
That girl the other day, she was like, I went over his house, he had some good tissue.
He did have real good toilet paper. Like, when you walk in somebody's stuff, they got real nice stuff. Right. All of it just magnified. I'm like, what kind of toilet paper do you use? 'Cause I'm gonna start using this toilet paper too. Because everything is nice, but it was a lot of work. He put in a lot of work, and to have somebody that represents what he represents in our family, like to me, it's always felt like a big deal, but it's also been a great deal of stress too, because when you ask like, when you make your first million. And then you're like, okay, because I can see it, I can achieve it too. So like all that stuff start coming in and making adulthood like even more complicated. But I was, what's the hardest decision I ever made? Mm-hmm. Was quitting that job. And because I felt like I was walking away from family. I feel like I was walking away from friend, like, we you and I are working together. But I also knew that like my world would probably come crumbling down in a way that would like have people looking at me and judging me. But I was like, it's okay, because when I looked at myself in the mirror, I didn't like who I had become.
Tell us about that.
I had made choices based off of my free will, whether it be money, feeling like I had this power and resources. And I didn't always consider how my choices and my decisions would impact other people, whether it be my child, whether it be like my marriage. And I didn't realize that my head had gotten a little big, right? Like my daddy always keeps it real. He be like, I don't know who you done turned into. I don't even know you no more.
Well,
and I didn't pay that. Hold on, I didn't pay that any mind because I had some judgments about him too. Like I ain't trying to be like you. Like maybe I respect some of the things about you as a human being, but I want life to be better. But I also didn't understand like the weight of that free will. But when I really looked at myself, I never said it, right? Because I was able to mask it just like a lot of us do. But I did not like who I had become. And trying to figure out like, how do you change that was very, very hard for me. So I started stepping outside of like what had become normal for me, because I had gotten to like no friends, no new friends, and like protecting my bubble because it was family. Feeling very, very alone because who's gonna leave all of that? Especially like what it represents to be Black, right? Like you rather go and leave this to go work for white people or whatever. Like all of those things, like trying to figure out like what does Quell need to do for her so that when I really look at myself in the mirror that I feel like I like who I am. Like that was
That
and
was
it was
hard.
that was hard for me. That was hard for me.
That's understandable. Whenever we have to take accountability and responsibility for who we are as a people, or as a person, that is where the true challenges happen and the true growth, right? The growth that comes out of taking responsibility for who you are and who you're becoming is the growth
Because
that comes right that with
to
that
some
is a
degree, I
different
feel like
magnitude.
there's no excuse, right? And when I say like no excuse, I can give you 1,001 reasons of why I had become who I had become.
Mm-hmm.
But today I feel like, like it's what I tell people when we get to a place of, like after you've come out of therapy, right? You tend to learn how to cope, to rationalize, be able to find a silver lining, and I was really good at that. Like it ain't that bad. I mean, things are still taken care of. We're good. We take our trips. But I really wasn't like getting the best out of me. Like what does Quell's truest potential look like? Like what does that look like?
Right. And I think that those are some of the questions that, in order to take accountability or responsibility, we have to ask ourselves, right? We have to ask
But you got to give
ourselves.
yourself space to get there too, because that's the thing about transitions, right? Like all of our transitions they're different, they're unique.
But do we have to give ourselves the space to get there, right? Because the sooner that we're asking these questions and understanding them, the sooner you can truly walk into accountability and responsibility, right? If you would have asked yourself at 21, what was, what's the best version of RaQuel, right?
Mhm.
You were probably getting a great version of her, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
based off of I didn't went to college, I didn't graduated, right. I didn't relocated, I'm in another city. I mean, I guess
because I think that is, I really believe that you've always been very responsible. I believe that you have always been responsible and you always have understood accountability and responsibility in a way that I'm probably just learning it today. Right? Take accountability for where you are in your life. Take accountability for the things that are happening in your life, right? And I would say I'm just now getting to that point. So if I got an issue with it, I'm like, okay, let me step back, think about that. Cieara, how are you responsible?
I always joke with C, and because we're friends, like now that we're older and we do a lot of self-reflection, that girl be fighting. Like, we went from kids to her like literally fighting. She would literally fight you to now she be ready to I'm not gonna say today, but like clap back. And I didn't really realize that she would clap back, but sometimes the clapping back, right? There is a level of not wanting to take like responsibility or accountability, and we've all had
or misunderstanding of what it truly looks like. I mean, like I said, I really feel like I've struggled with accountability and responsibility until much of today, right? And not because it was like I didn't want to grow, or do better or show up better. It was, okay, I'm doing this, but how is this like hurting or harming me? How is this putting me in XYZ place? Not fully having maybe that mental complexity to put all those pieces together. And so that's why I say you can start anytime asking yourself those questions, but you got to have the language for it. Because if you don't have the language for it, struggle may truly happen.
That's why I say it's so important to, that's why I'm always like, you know, you're not a child anymore. Spending a lot of time on your inner child, like you're an adult now. The adult you needs the adult version of you. And I'm really big on that because there is another side that I feel like society has not introduced us to from a mental health standpoint, is this whole adult development thing. And I always talk about these forms of mind in terms of like when I at 18 years old, like the self-sovereign mindset showed up so clearly. Like I can understand it today, but if I had the language to understand like this is normal based off of you being between the ages of 18 to 25, that the only thing that really matters is you. And I got married at 25 too. 24, right. 25, like, and that's not to say just because you turn 26 that you're no longer in that form of mind as an adolescent either, because I was still very much there. Like the world was still very so much black and white, trying to take on the perspective of a husband. Like, I ain't even trying to hear what you got to say, especially when, you know, I'm making the I'm doing my thing. Like, you know, typical black women, I don't need no man, child. And all of that went against like what I really, really, really wanted. But I think that understanding like not necessarily understanding there's a cause and effect. Like all of that played out for me. And I think that if we're really going to combat like the whole life is hard, people have to understand like what it looks like to develop as an adult, because like just having the language, right? And that's what you're saying, having the language. People have so much language around healing, like when 50 says depression is a luxury, like people have the language around like how important it is to identify and acknowledge your feelings and your emotions, right? But there's another layer of growth there.
Right.
And I always say like you have to be willing to take yourself out of environments that look like you're growing, because that's why I say that was the hardest thing for me to do, because it put me in environments to where I was really uncomfortable.
Moving to Houston was very, very uncomfortable
for
me.
Come to Houston.
I mean, I was happy to come too, till I end up walking on the interstate and somebody cursing me out when I'm doing all the things.
Bringing my country ass to a big city. I was like, oh, this is nice. I remember being Daddy first got here and riding around like in the Galleria, seeing the lights. I was like, oh, this is real nice.
Girl, you came here with a man and free time. I came here with a child and work to do. So, our experiences were very, very different.
I can see that. It felt overwhelming.
It felt hard. Because
when I came, I had a job. Mm-hmm. You know, I got the experience of, I think my uncle has always been positioning that way too. Like, I want you to feel like when you come here, we're going to get you corporate housing. What the fuck is that? Like, but at 22, like that was my experience.
Right.
And a lot of times you know, when people say like, Quill, how are you so mature for your age? Like, this the experience and the exposure that I've gotten. And, you know, to go from, I always say I went from like shit to sugar. And then I realized that the shit and the sugar were no different depending on like how you viewed the world. Like to me, it was no different, because there were times where I'm like, I'd rather just go back home. Life was so much easier because the success is hard, which is what success is complicated. Like we are always figuring it out.
Okay, so 1 second. This gonna take us on a roller coaster real quick, but I'm gonna say it. I was watching this movie the other day, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't even know the name of the movie, right? But it showed this guy going into the military, and he was going to the military with his uniform on, and I remember he was on a bus with everybody, right? And the guys, I think they were going to, what war was it? Vietnam War. They were on their way to the Vietnam War. You could see the guys, they were scared, but they were pumped, right, to show up for their country. And then after he had got out of the military, he went back home. He faced a whole bunch of like hard times, right? He ended up robbing a bank and getting caught, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then he was on a bus again in a uniform. But at this time, it was a jail uniform. And my thoughts when I saw the scene of him on the bus and like going to jail, I said it was no different from going to the military. It was his perception of what was happening, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of I'm so eager to take on this this new experience, but going to jail was going to be a new experience too. And it's no different from like we talked about Viktor Frankl a couple of episodes ago, being in the concentration camps and truly deciding your perception of like what reality you're going to experience. And I don't know if it's deciding your perception or just being in control, right?
Right.
Understanding that
it takes courage to do life.
Right. No matter what it looks like.
Courage. Right.
So whether we come into these fancy lives of moving all the way halfway across the world, but not halfway across the world, but halfway across the country, filled with opportunity, or we're in our local neighborhood. Like, how do you see the opportunity that is lying right in front of you? How can you get excited about what you're going to do? Like, where's the responsibility there? Because, I mean, when we talk about impact, all I think about is the stuff I want to do for Huntersville. Like,
I mean, but that's another layer of adulthood, right? I always say that we get to a point of generativity versus stagnation, and that's usually like where you pushing, which is 40, because you pushing 40.
I'm closer to 30 than I am to 40, but okay.
There's a framework, right? And the framework is just a guideline, just like anything else, a resource, right? But what ends up happening is same thing, like, what impact will I have on the world? And I think that's where we are. That's why we show up and we do the podcast, hopefully to inspire people. I know that I always say that a great deal of this for our kids, because I understand your feelings and your emotions, baby, but you have to have the courage to be able to show up for life. Like, while it's going to feel hard, you're going to have these transitions.
Or even look hard.
Yeah,
and
even look hard.
And even be like a mucky season that you're walking into, but how can you approach it with the same charisma that you would anything else? Because I think that is...
Because it's easy to be positive and grateful when everything is good.
Right, it is. It's so easy to be like, oh yeah, I'm doing this new thing, but do you do it with love when it's hard?
Right.
Do you do it with love when it passion. Don't? Yeah.
Or do you jump back into like life is hard again, or understanding like these are transitions, and these transitions are moments. They're opportunities for you to grow and to learn, to lean into life.
I'm getting a little bit emotional too, because I felt like that was part of my journey too, right? And probably why I really, really struggled with like the accountability and responsibility piece, right? Because do you do it with the same passion when it's hard? And I even remember having that same lesson like out traveling the world. I remember we were traveling. I mean, we were on so many planes and so many days, and I was like, I think after flying from Europe to Chile, I was sick. I literally felt like sick mentally, sick physically.
I did book them flights like that.
And like my body felt crappy, and I had actually gotten a bit cranky. I don't know if you remember it or not, but I had actually gotten a bit.
I was still probably in that phase where
she was in that phase too. Basically, you don't get it. Don't act like you're so deserving of this that you don't show up your best self. Don't do that. But that was, I mean, as tough as that was, that's true. That's true. I mean, it's the truth. It is a truth.
It was your truth. in that moment?
Well, I mean, I think it's a lot of people's truths, but
About what? Like,
oh,
sometimes
even
we
when
get
it's
tired.
hard, even
okay,
when we
okay,
tired,
okay.
like approach judge it like it's a new day.
Right.
Like take some accountability and responsibility over things so you can show up your best self.
Right, because what I continue to say is adulthood gives something that childhood doesn't necessarily give, which is free agency.
Right.
And you cannot dismiss like the free agency that you have over your life.
Right.
Because there's nobody else that's like painting the canvas for you. I did a post yesterday and said like the past, the road may has been bumpy,
Right.
but the future is a blank canvas for you to start drawing and figuring out what that path forward looks like for you. And I think oftentimes, because of different reasons, right? Whether it be your form of mind in adulthood, not necessarily having the language, or the professionals that even understand it, right? Because I mean that adult development theory is very difficult to understand, and I think it can be very difficult to understand based off of your experiences and your exposure.
Mm-hmm.
Because in life it feels like there are a lot of things that are true,
right?
And I would say probably one of my biggest revelations in terms of being able to grow and like meet people where they are and being able to work with anybody has been there are no truths. It's only true because I think it's true, and it's only true because they think it's true. And that has allowed me to like open up my mind in ways that like I'm just so grateful for. But all of that stuff that we just talked about has been my walk. And I know oftentimes we say that if you're spiritual, like God already has a plan for you. Like if you just like it you still have some control over what
that reminds me of faith without works is dead.
Okay. And on that note, I enjoyed this conversation.
I enjoyed this conversation.
I'm gonna shout out LP on this podcast because before we came in here, he gave some tips. He's like, I know y'all like talking about like this stuff, but lean into it a little bit more. Don't come in as if you're not prepared. And again, new environment, new people that are willing to like pour and water on you. So thank you, LP.
Thank you, LP.
Who's behind the camera right now. We really appreciate you. You've taken this Success is Complicated podcast to another level with giving the visual and this space. But just going back to, I think you said like the grit of life, right? And we were talking about life is hard. And as an adult, like I would challenge you to not necessarily take on the life is hard. There will be moments, but more importantly, transitions, whether it be your career, single, getting married to getting divorced, that will test you in ways that you may not necessarily be prepared. But be courageous, step into it, because that has also been put into the works in order for you to grow. Like, life is always presenting opportunities. We always say it's presenting opportunities, never like problems. So thank you so much for listening to us. If you have not subscribed to the podcast on YouTube, follow us, subscribe, leave comments, follow us on Instagram at Success is Complicated, and we'll see you guys next week. Until then, we're out.
All right.